Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class this afternoon. Whoa, my microphone's a little hot. That's what happens when you haven't done a live stream in a couple weeks, I guess. Haven't been on here since the fall semester ended. So it's been about 2 or 3 weeks since I've been doing a live streamed class. So gotta adjust the settings just a little bit. Thank you all for joining me this afternoon, whether you're joining me live or whether you are watching the recording. This is our very first live stream for Web 140, Web Development Tools. And in the introductory videos, right, I talked a little bit about kind of the purpose of this course and what I'd like to do today. I'd like to just reiterate that a little bit as we are starting up front here. Go over a couple of announcements just so we can kind of all be on the same page as we're getting started. As a reminder, these live classes cover material for the next module. Right, so today our Begin Here module is over. If you haven't completed the introductory discussion board or the orientation quiz or the EVA, make sure you get that completed by today, although I think everybody's gotten their EVA completed. I was looking a little bit earlier, and I think everybody is settled in terms of the verification for their enrollment for the semester, which is good because it's led to something that I'm going to be talking with you all about here in just a few minutes. So I think we're all good there. The other thing that we would have here would be just making sure you get the other stuff done there, the orientation quiz, the introductory discussion board. I want to say everybody's done that, but you know, if you haven't, you want to get that done today. And our next module is our HTML and CSS Refresh Bootcamp module. And so we'll be talking more about that here in just a little bit. We'll be getting into that. I'm going to do something that I don't actually get to do a whole lot, which is just sit down and code for a little while. It's always fun for me when I get to do that for you all. Just demonstrating some code and demonstrating some strategies and best practices so that you can understand a little bit better how to actually make this stuff. This is a second level course, right? So this is a second year course. That's not to say that you can't be successful in it if you haven't had any HTML, CSS, or JavaScript before. However, you have a higher chance of being successful if you have had these prerequisites. Right? So we're going to have different people at different skill levels working in the course this semester. That's completely fine. Right, we've had people take this course out of sequence before and end up okay. You know, we're going to be able to make it. And where that might become relevant would be in something else that has been completed and is ready to go now. Since everybody completed their EVA, I was able to assign your groups. You'll notice here on the menu bar that you have a My Group link here at the bottom on the left-hand side there. You have a My Group link, and if you click that, that should take you to your group. And I have both groups here, Team A and Team B. We can see that each group has 3 enrolled members in it, so we have 2 even groups here. Since our groups only have 3 members in them, that does lead me to talk about something else here that we'll talk about in just a moment. But when you click the name of your group, that will take you to your group page. It will show you who your program of study client is. For example, group A here is Associate Degree Nursing, and it'll show you who else is in your group. This also provides you some tools here that you can use on Blackboard, right? You can send email to all your group members. You can create a group wiki. You can set up group tasks. All that kind of fun stuff. It just gives you a few more tools in order to be able to interact with your group. However, most of your interaction, in terms of like actually setting up things to do and making sure everybody meets their milestones and all these sorts of fun things will probably be done on GitHub when we get into that next week, right? We'll talk more about how you use all of that, right? GitHub is basically our collaboration platform for the course. So a lot of that stuff will be done on GitHub. And this here just gives you another option. It lets you know what your program of study is and who your other group members are. And again, that's found at the My Group link that is in your course navigation here. And these teams were put together randomly. I think it actually ended up putting them together fairly well, right? We have, the majority of you have more experience this time. We have a couple people who, are kind of just now getting into some of this stuff or might have some lesser experience in these areas. So I think the way our groups kind of leveled out here turned out pretty well. And you can kind of assign different roles based on that. Speaking of, since we only have 3, if we look at our final project is designed for 4. Right, which means that one person will have to take 2 roles. Now, ideally, what I would want to say that you should do is maybe take somebody who maybe combine roles 3 and 4 here. Maybe combine the roles for person 3 and person 4. The Canva role doesn't take a ton of time, right? Like you can spend a lot of time doing that. Another thing that you might want to do is maybe combine 1 and 3, right? Because using, if you have somebody who's more familiar with HTML and CSS, implementing a design with Bootstrap, it's going to be easier. I would not recommend pairing anything up with the jQuery, the person 2. Responsibility here. But I think 1 and 3 or 3 and 4 are good ones to kind of lump together here. And, you all get to decide who does what. One thing I will need pretty early is that one of you has to be the group leader, the one that's responsible for managing the GitHub repo. So you'll be the one who is dealing with pull requests when we get to that point. And you'll be, doing other stuff in terms of like project management, making sure everything goes along smoothly. So really, 2 people have 2 jobs here. Because kind of being the group leader is kind of a job unto itself. But remember that here, in the final project link on your navigation, it gives you all of the information about the final project that you'll need, what your expectations are, and all this kind of fun stuff. And your first group assignment is due with Module 2, I believe. We have these group labs. This one in particular is called Getting the Team Together. Each team member should submit the same file for this assignment. You'll select a leader. You'll create a GitHub. That team leader will create a GitHub. They'll add all the team leaders or the team collaborators to that repository. You'll put a file in there called roles.txt that talks about, each member of your group and what they've chosen as their selected role. And each group member will submit that link to that repo. No problem. I guess one more thing I should talk about that I normally talk about, but I forgot to talk about, is why I chose to use YouTube here as my live course medium for most of my online classes. I think YouTube's fairly easy for people to use. I think having the chat feature as our means of interacting with one another is the best way to kind of do that. It kind of eases people's minds in terms of how they can participate, right? Like, you don't have to worry about is my camera on, is my microphone on. None of that is relevant. If you have a question, just type it in the chat. I do monitor it. I will see it. I might not see it right away, but I will see it. And then, basically everybody uses YouTube these days, right? So, when we think about kind of going to people where they are, which is one of the things that I think education should do, is kind of meet people where they're at. That's where people are, is they're on YouTube, right? Like, I saw a statistic not that long ago, 80% of people, when they want to learn something new, they go to YouTube. And so, why not put our learning tools on YouTube? So with that being said, I think that covers everything that we need to cover here that we haven't already covered. Right? Make sure you get done with the Begin Here module today. Your teams are available. You might want to go ahead and have a look at those. While you're thinking about roles that you might want to do over the next, let's see, module 1. See, that Get module is going to be due not next Thursday, but the next. So you got about 2 weeks to think about what your role is. So you might want to kind of poke around in some of the other modules, see what you think about it in terms of whether or not, you think that would be something that you would be capable of doing, especially after learning about it, so on and so forth, right? And then that is that. So we're talking about Module 1 today, and Module 1 is our HTML and CSS Refresh Bootcamp. And, like I mentioned before, this is a second year course in our program. So typically students entering into this course have an understanding of HTML, have an understanding of CSS, have an understanding of JavaScript to some degree, right? At least a base level. So when I show you HTML, when I show you CSS, when I show you some of these things that we'll be working on, it's not like a complete surprise to you, right? It's something that is at least somewhat familiar. Right, but when it's not on our minds and it's not on the forefronts of our minds, or, we're just somebody who doesn't really have a bunch of experience with that, right? Because we don't have to take these courses in any sort of required order. It becomes kind of important for us to do a little bit of a refresh, a little bit of a boot camp to kind of run you through here. Right, it just gives you a little bit of information about how to get started. We look at the text editor. The one that I use, the one that I'll be using today, is Visual Studio Code. I'll show you how to set that up and use that for the best of your abilities. Talk about the HTML skeleton here. We'll make that. I'll show you an easy way to do that in VS Code here in just a little bit. Our basic tags, which is our heading, our paragraphs, our spans, and our links, and our images. We also talk about a few more tags. These are semantic tags. They have a purpose to them. Talk a little bit about CSS styling. Show you some examples of that. And, one of the big things that we need to kind of get familiar with is being able to kind of use references. So I've included this HTML and CSS reference here from W3 Schools. These will kind of show you the different... Load, please. There we go. These will show you, it has all the different things that you can do, and you can kind of go through and say, oh, well, I want to be able to do, I want to be able to make rounded corners on my button, or I want to be able to make, I want to be able to use colors, and you can go in here and you can look at colors, and there's different levels of all this, and this is the kind of stuff that we start covering in Web 115. We cover it a lot more. We cover some of this stuff a lot more in Web 215. Some of this stuff we never cover, right? Because if we took time covering all the little teeny tiny pieces of HTML and CSS, we would never get anything done. Right? So being able to utilize reference and going back and researching things and trying to figure out, well, how do I do this? Or if I want to do that, how do I do that? Then, that's a skill in and of itself. And so, like I said, one of the things that I like to do personally for these boot camps, and if you're with me in the fall, just as a heads up, there is a boot camp in every single course with a web prefix. So everything that is web something has one of these boot camps in it. It's the same thing, just the assignment's different, right? And that allows you to get more reps, more practice. Because really, at the end of the day, that's what we really need when it comes to building websites and being able to use all this code and all that kind of fun stuff, is just practice. Doing the things that, doing these things over and over and over again, and then we can kind of learn some stuff. So every web prefixed course, which in the fall, that's Web 210, that is Web 215, and that is Web... Well, the other one would be Web 140, but you all are taking this now. They all have one of these bootcamp site builds in them, in the same informational module. So you can already be expecting that now if you decide to take the rest of our second level classes in the fall, which some of you should be. I know some of you are already signed up for them. And so what I like to do for these is I just like to build a site, which I think is pretty fun. So I'm going to show you some Visual Studio Code stuff here. And just proceed to build a really basic website. And we'll use some techniques that would be maybe a little bit different, a little bit, for those of you who have been in Web 115, I'm going to try to stick to just using the stuff that we learned in Web 115 as much as possible. However, I'm going to introduce some new units, introduce some new things along with that. Because, in the fall, we'd be doing this alongside of Web 215, which, is good there as well. So I am in Visual Studio Code. And what I've already done is I've already set up a folder on my machine. Right, I've created a Web 140 Summer 22 directory here. And in here is where I'll be, putting all of my demo files, and I'll be uploading them to GitHub so that you all can have access to my files as well. So I have a Bootcamp folder here. So this is my project folder for this particular project. And what I want to do is I want to open that project folder in Visual Studio Code. Then I can make all of my files and everything I need to make from within Visual Studio Code. Just as a reminder, this is what that file looks like right now. It is empty. So I'm going to go and I'm going to open folder. And that's going to bring up my dialog that, has where you would get to all of your files at, your basic Windows Explorer here. And you can navigate to your files. In this case, this would be Web 140 SU22. You can see where I have done this previously here. And here's our Bootcamp folder, and we're going to select that folder. Yes, I trust the authors. And you'll see that that pops out our Explorer window here. In our Explorer tab in Visual Studio Code, we have this nice drop down here for Bootcamp, which is the folder that we created here that we just navigated to. There's nothing in it yet, but I can use these icons here to create files and folders inside of Bootcamp here. So if I wanted to create, say, an HTML file, I can click the New File button here and type in index.html. And that's going to create that file. And that even creates it in the folder. Right, if I bring the folder back over now, right, it no longer says no file is present. It has my index.html. And you'll remember back, and you'll remember that, the root file of all of our websites is going to be an index.html. If we wanted to include some other HTML files in there, with this, we'd call them something different. But since this is our root file, it's going to be index.html. I'm going to create a folder here, and I'm going to call it, let's call it CSS. And in that folder, I'm going to put a style.css file. And that way we can have one folder, that would help us out for the future, right? Like when we get to, say, Bootstrap. We can take, if we wanted to download and host Bootstrap ourselves, we could put it in the CSS folder along with style.css. And everything would work. We'd have all of our CSS files in one location. So now we can see we have our style.css file open here, our index.html file open here, and we can jump back and forth between the two. And if we look back in our Bootcamp folder here, we see CSS folder. There's our style.css, so on and so forth. So now we have our project ready. And so we can start to write some code. And so what I'd like to do here is I'd like to go ahead and start with my HTML skeleton. The HTML skeleton is the bare bones of what we need to be able to create a website. In Visual Studio Code, since I've already saved this as a .html file, it knows it is it knows it's an HTML file. It knows it's a website. I can use some built-in features through something called Emmet, which does code expansion, to write my HTML skeleton for me. So I can start out by hitting the exclamation point key. You'll see it'll come up with a little Emmet abbreviation for a single exclamation point here. I can click that, and it gives me the entirety of my HTML skeleton. We see I have my doc type here. I have my HTML tags, my head tags, my body tags, and my title. It also includes a lot of other information that's important for us to use, like our language here, which is important for accessibility purposes. The char set being UTF-8, X-UA compatible. Sets the initial viewport, which will be more important in the fall for some of you when we talk about responsive websites. Right, so one of the things that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to change my title. The title is the part that shows up in the little bar at the top of your website. Right, so I'm going to change this to Bootcamp demo site. And I'm going to go ahead and save it. Now, one of the things that I'm going to recommend to you all is installing the live server extension. The live server extension, here it is in my extensions palette. Live server, created by Ritwick Day. If you look on your VS Code menu here on the side, you'll see there's this little, it looks kind of like building blocks here. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down from the top. That's your extension marketplace. If you go here and you type live server, and then specifically for the Ritwick Day one, like mine comes up at the top because I have it installed. You might want to actually type in this person's name, Ritwick Day, D-E-Y, and it'll come up for you. And all you do is hit the blue install button and it'll install for you. The great thing about this is that it actually creates a live server instance on your machine, so it'll display your website properly. All I have to do is click into my HTML file here and select Open with Live Server. And that will use that extension to create a live server. It'll show you when it's created the live server. It gives you the port number that that's happening on. And yep, here it is. It's opened up on my other monitor. Let me drag it over. It'll open your demo, your site there. So that's something that you'll want to do for this project and for all projects. It's just some good best practice there. Makes life a little bit easier. And you can see Bootcamp demo site up here at the top. Bootcamp demo site, that's that title. And so now I'm ready to start writing some code. And one of the first things that I'll want to do is I'll actually want to link my CSS file inside of my HTML file. So I'm going to do that in the head. So I'm going to go to the end of my title line here, hit the enter key, link rel equals, since we put it in a folder, it's going to be css/style.css. And actually that's an href, not a rel. I haven't gotten to my rel yet. That's href. So link href css/style.css. Rel is going to be style sheet. And then type equals text /CSS. And link is a self-closing tag, so we can close it with /greater than, just like that. And so now what that's done here is that's established that this CSS file is a part of this project. It is linked to this HTML file, so my browser knows to load that HTML file or that CSS file along with that HTML file. And one of the cool things about using live server is as I save in here, it automatically refreshes the live server here, right? So now that I've saved that, I should go back here. I should be able to select page source here from our right-click menu. And you can see if we look here now, we have that link href equals there, which is pretty cool. All this code here was injected by this JavaScript here. This was all injected by that live server, so it is able to do that automatic refreshing. You don't have to worry about that. And so let's make sure that we have set up our CSS correctly. One of the things that I like to do whenever I'm creating a website is I like to start out by resetting my site. One of the things that we talk about in CTI 110 and in Web 115 is that, by default, our browser has some style attributes that it applies to everything, right? There's default styling that's applied to everything. So one of the things that I like to do is just go ahead and reset everything right off the bat. So in my CSS, I will use my asterisk selector, which is our wildcard selector, right? That basically stands for everything. And we will make our width 100%. We will make our... And actually, we don't need to make our width 100% because by default, width is 100%. And that's fine. What we would rather do is make box sizing to be border box. So we get to use that whole box model cheat that we talked about in Web 115. We will take and we will remove margin and padding. So margin is 0 pixels. Padding is 0 pixels. This way we can kind of control it a little bit better. We can add it back as we're adding items to our site. And now to make sure that our CSS is actually linked correctly, I'm going to go ahead and change the background color of the site. And I do that by manipulating the background property for my body element. So that's body, background. You can use background as a shorthand or background dash color. I have a site here that I like to use when I need some inspiration. So in something like this where I don't have, some colors to work with, I like to use this site called Happy Hues, happyhues.co. It's a bunch of curated palettes for projects that you can kind of go through and use. You can just click on the color and it'll copy it for you, and you can paste it right in your project. And I'm going to be using that as my color palette for our demonstration today. So if I put that as the background color of our body element, I should be able to save that. And now we know our CSS is linked properly because when we visit our live site here, we can see the background color has changed. So good, we know everything's working so far. When I'm building a basic website, I like to use just a standard kind of boilerplate to get things done, right? Like you've basically seen every site that you've probably visited has this sort of similar kind of layout where they have like a full width header, a full width footer, and then some kind of content area in the middle. And then what's in here could be anything. What's in here could be anything. What's here could be anything, right? But we have this same basic layout. So I like to just kind of, whenever I'm kind of building a site like this that's just a quick demo, I like to use a little bit of boilerplate that would mimic that. So we're going to use our header, semantic tags, our main, semantic tags, and our footer, semantic tags. And so by adding each of those sets of semantic tags we've created for ourselves the basic boilerplate that we would need. Now, it doesn't look like anything yet, right? Like if we save that and go back to our Bootcamp site, it doesn't look like anything, and that's because we've not applied any style to it. So we'll jump back over to our CSS file. We will focus our header, element selector. I will use this nice light button color as our background color here. Background color is this pale orange. Width is going to be 100%. It's going to be 100% by default. Let's set a height. Let's set a height of, let's say, 300 pixels. And that's probably good enough for our header. So now we can focus our main. For our main here, I've got it's a little off-white. We'll set that as the background. Remember that we can use background by itself as a shorthand or background dash color. Let me zoom in here so you all can see this just a little bit better. Since I don't want this to be full width, I want to shrink it down just a little bit. So I'm going to set the width, and I'm going to use a responsive set of a responsive value here. So I'm going to set it to 70 VW. And again, you'll learn more about VW in the fall. That's viewport width. That is essentially 70% of the width of the screen, or the width of the viewport, rather. Which that's, when we're talking about the viewport here, we're talking about your browser window, right? So as your browser window narrows, this will narrow as well to fill up 70% of the viewport width. Just the same, you could kind of do like what we did here, right? Like alternatively, this could be, say, something like 960 pixels or whatever, right? We can use those static widths, or, we could just make it 960. So we'll just put that there as a comment, right? This denotes that it's a CSS comment, so it'll just be ignored by our browser as it's rendering. 70 viewport width also works, and then we'll use our margin trick to kind of center that up. Margin 0 auto. And so since we got rid of margin and padding here, this should be right up against the top of the screen. Our header should be, our main here should be right up against that. One of the things I'll also want to do here is put a bit of a minimum height. We're going to use our min height. So min height is, we're essentially saying that we want this to be at least this tall, right? And just so my sites don't look weird, I always set a min height on my mains, right? Just so like the footer is not like up at the top header, right? So I'll set like a 600 pixel minimum height here. And so if the content that goes into the main here dictates that it needs to be bigger than minimum height, then it will expand and grow taller accordingly. But it will at least be this tall, which is 600 pixels tall, which is pretty cool. And yeah, I think that's all we want to do with that. Is percent the same as VW? Is the question that is in the chat. Yes, basically. There are some little differences about the two that we kind of get into in the fall, but essentially percent is the same as VW. Since VW is viewport width, then it's going to always be relative to the size of the viewport, whether it is a parent element or a child element. That's where the real difference between the two comes in, right? Because, like, for example here, this could be 70 VW, this could be 70%, and it's going to be the same because it's essentially a child of the body, which is a full width, full viewport width item. But if I were to put an item in here, in my main, and have it be 70 viewport width, it would be the same width, whereas 70% would be 70% of the parent. So it would be 70% of the viewport width. So it does get a little convoluted in terms of, percentages and viewport widths. But for this particular purpose, we can essentially think of it as 70% and 70 viewport width, same thing. Right? That's one of the things we get into a little bit more in the fall when we start talking about responsive development. Let's add some styling for our footer really quickly. So that's footer. Thank you. So we'll just add some styling here for our footer really quickly. Let's see, I have like a dark gray here that we'll give it a background color of. So that will be background with our dark gray. Width is 100%, and so that's fine. We'll give it a little bit of a height here. We'll give it a little bit of a height of like 500 pixels. And so this really should have us kind of set up with a nice little bit of boilerplate that we can start to work off of. So if we look at our demo site now, right, we can kind of see something that we're familiar with, right? Like, a lot of websites kind of use this similar sort of structure, if you will. Right, and so we see our minimum height here in use, right? Because that's a minimum of 600 pixels tall. If my text went outside of that, it would get taller on its own, which is good. Let's see, what do I want to do next? Let's just code a little bit for a little while and just have some fun with it. Because I was thinking that one of the things that I might want to do is maybe put some different color bands in there, right? Like I can manipulate the border here. So I can focus, say, border top, 10 pixels, solid, and I might even want that to be more, but we'll go 10 for now, and use this same color that we used for our header. Put that there, right? What that's going to do is that's going to create a little band of color that runs right along the top here. And since we are using that border box sizing here at the top, that's including this size in the height of the box. So we don't have to do any recalculation there. We'll make it even. We'll make it bigger. We'll make it like 30 pixels here. Which, since we made this 500 pixels here, this is 30 pixels here, which means we have 470 pixels that are still usable down there. We could do something similar here at the top with border bottom. For our sake, for our purposes here, I kind of like where it's at here. So we'll just kind of keep going. Let's create some articles in our index here. So inside of our main, I want to put some articles, or I want to put some sections, right? So our main tags, and I want to grab me some lorem ipsum here really quickly. So if I wanted to put, a section in here, a section is going to contain a section of our text. So inside of my main, I might put some section tags. Inside of those section tags, I might put, say, a H1 and a paragraph, or something of that nature, right? And so when we save that, we can kind of see what that looks like here. We don't have anything in our H1 right now. Let's take like the first part of this sentence here, copy that and paste that in here. Right, so now we have this section tag, which is inside the main tag. So that means that this code is a section unto itself of our main content for this site. So we save this, and we can see it in action here now. One of the things that we can see here is that it's all the way to the edge of the bounding box of our main. One of the things that a lot of you will hear me talk about, especially in the design class, is breathing room. I don't like to have things like right up next to touching the edge of something. So what we could do here is we could add some margin to our sections. Or we could just add some padding to our main. And since we already have a main here, we'd probably be better off adding just a little bit of padding here just to draw things away from the edge just a little bit. And so that draws it right away from the edge. You could put a border bottom between your sections, and that would create a little bit of a demarcation, right? So if I wanted to take my section, which I need to do a little bit of, if I wanted to take my section and add a little border bottom, 3 pixels, solid, black, or it'd actually probably be better if it was this brown. We could throw that in there. Right, save it. And that's going to give me a little bit of a demarcation here. We can adjust some padding and things of that nature to kind of spread things out, right? So padding bottom and so on and so forth. But what I would rather do, I think, is use what is called a horizontal rule. So underneath my section, I'm going to put a singular HR tag. HR stands for horizontal rule. It is essentially just a line that'll be drawn across your page. We can style that a little bit. But by default, we can see that it looks like this, just a simple small line. Right. One of the reasons I like to use a horizontal rule is that it's a little more flexible in terms of what I can do with it, right? Like I can write some really complicated CSS to make that border bottom narrower, or I could just start to manipulate my horizontal rule. So I can focus my HR element. I can change the width to maybe something like 60%. And this would be a good place where we could show you the difference between percent and viewport width, right? Because we're actually inside of a parent element here now, right? So 60% is 60% of the parent container, right? So I can see here that I have 60% or 40% white space here. If I were to change that to 60 viewport width, now that's going to be relative to the viewport instead of the container, so we can see how much longer it is here now, right? It was like down to like here for percentages, but now it's 60% of the viewport instead of 60% of the container. And if I were to shrink this down a little bit, we can actually see that. So as I narrow my browser, that's narrowing my viewport and narrowing everything accordingly. Right, so since I want this to be relative to my container, I will use percentage. So our HR is kind of a bit of a hack, right? Like it's kind of creating an HTML element and just making it a line. So we can style it more. I don't want to say border none, and that will actually remove the line. But I can also give it a bit of a height here of, say, 4 pixels. Give it a background color of, say, that brown we were looking at earlier. Throw that in there. Maybe center it up using our margin trick. Margin 0 auto. Save that. And now we have this horizontal separator here. Now, one of the things that we might want to do is add, instead of 0 auto here, we could make that like 24 pixels in auto. Because remember, that first number is top and bottom. So we could actually have a little bit of top and bottom margin there to give it a little bit of distance. You know, maybe even more, maybe something like 48 pixels to give it a little bit of distance from the paragraph here. And so one of the things that, we'll talk about in the fall as well is before and after, using before and after pseudo selectors in our CSS. And you can actually do some cool things with horizontal rules using before and afters as well. But just for our purposes here, so we can kind of move on and get things done pretty quickly, I'm just going to take this whole section with the horizontal rule, copy it, and paste it a couple times here. And let's keep going with it. Because I want, if possible, I want you all to see the min height change, which it's done here. So min height has changed. Let's adjust some other stuff. And again, I'm going to be giving you this site in a GitHub repository. So you will be able to look through this code a little bit closer, examine it, play with it a little bit if you want to. Let's add some font family. we'll use that one. How did you center it and change the thickness again? So in our horizontal rule here, the centering was done with our margin trick. Right, so margin on the top and bottom. All we do is set our margin on the left and right to auto. So that takes and centers it in. Right, we have to give it a width that is less than the full width in order for us to be able to do that. And in order to change the thickness, we just adjusted the height. Because really all it's doing here is just kind of creating a single little HTML element, right? Like we can almost kind of think of it as a div, right? So we're just kind of treating it the same way that we would a div, except one of the things that we'd also have to do is remove the border from it because it puts a border on it by default. Let's see here. Is there anything that I want to do with these sections? Maybe increase their font size, although I'd want to really do that using relative selectors here. So for example, like if I wanted to change the font size of every paragraph that belonged to a section, I can represent them in one tag, just separating them with a space. I could also put my greater than symbol in here. Font size, say 18 pixels. And so now we can see that the paragraphs that are a part of these have a larger font size. We could add some padding to this of, say, 12 pixels. Right, and that's going to give us a little bit of offset here, making that look pretty nice. Maybe we could take and do something similar here and work with the H1s. Section H1. And that's going to be color. Remember, it's the word color for text and the word background dash color or background for background color. Maybe change those to be brown. And that's going to be hard to tell because that's a dark color. But that's creating a pretty fun site here. Right, so let's just do a couple more things really quickly. One of the things that I would like to do is I would like to add an image to this site. So I'll add a logo in the header. And then we'll make a real quick navigation, and we'll probably call this one a day because we're hitting that hour mark right now. And I don't really like to go any longer than an hour, hour 15 for these live streams if I can help it. Right, so I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to use our egg truck logo as the image for this. So I'm going to open up that logo. I'm going to save it. File, save, image as. And I'm going to make sure to save it in my project. Where did it open, or did it open? There it is. It's just thinking a lot. Got a lot to think about here. I want to save it in my project so I can include it with my project. Remember that you either have to have this image in the project as a part of the project, or you have to upload it onto a CDN service like Cloudinary in order to be able to use it and have it show up on your site. If the image is not there with it, it won't know what I'm talking about. So let's see here. That is Web 140, Summer 22, Bootcamp Project, logo.png. And so once that finishes downloading, we'll actually be able to see the logo in our project in Visual Studio, which is pretty cool. Right? See, there it is. Logo.png. And if I click it there, it should come up here. It might be because it's not quite been released from Opera here yet. Wants to be just a little bit slow. For those of you who were with me last spring, you learned the plight of my device here. Still haven't gotten my new device yet. Should have it pretty soon. Okay, and now it's showing up, so we should be able to use it in our project. So I'm just going to put that in the header of our site. And we're just going to add it as an image using our image tags. In the fall, for those of you who are still with me, we'll talk about a different way to do this as well. But for now, we'll just use our IMG. The source is going to be logo.png. That's the name of the file. Since it's in the same folder as our index.html, it's going to understand its location. We're going to give it an alt of egg truck. Remember, we want to give our images alt text for accessibility purposes. And then we can go ahead and close the image tag since our image is self-closing. So now we should be able to see our logo here. There it is. And we could keep this here. We could center it up. We can resize it. There's a lot of stuff that we can do with it. Since by default, if we are going to do something with it, by default, our images are inline elements instead of block elements. So we'll need to change the display type to block to be able to work with it. So that we can access this a little bit easier and not interfere with all the other images on the page, let's add an ID selector here. So we'll add an ID selector of logo, ID equals logo, like so. And so now I can just reference hashtag logo in my CSS. That is the wrong key. Hashtag logo. And we'll see, like, if I just tried to center it now, margin 0 auto. If I just tried to center it now, it would not know what to do with it because it is still an inline element, right? We saved that. We refreshed the page. Doesn't know what to do, right? We see it's saved here. So I need to make sure that's being displayed as a block level element. And when I do that, it centers right up, which is pretty cool. I can give it a little margin top here if I wanted to, right? Like maybe it's 6 pixels away from the top. So we can have just a little bit of breathing room. I don't think I necessarily wanted to do that. But we're just going to leave it at 0 here. And there's our image. Looking pretty good. And normally the last thing that I would do in one of these demonstrations would be to do a navigation. So since we took up most of our header here with our logo, which, I mean, we could make that logo a little bit smaller, right? We could change the width to be something like 50 pixels. And then the height would be auto. And then that would allow us to resize it, right? Make it small. But I kind of like the big logo style, so I think I'll put a little navigation in the footer down here instead. So we'll make a horizontal navigation down here in the footer, and we'll call it a day. So in my footer, in my HTML, I'm going to add an unordered list using my UL tags. Wrong key. Believe it or not, a lot of the navigation menus that you see are just lists that have been styled to look like something. In the fall, we will discuss another different way to make a navigation. But, you know, since we haven't done anything with that yet, we'll still use the old school method of using our unordered list here. We'll put an LI, a list item, and an A, href. So this is a link. The link will go nowhere. This will be home. We'll just make a few of these. About catalog, whatever. Or we're doing the egg truck logo here. We could say menu and contact, just to have a few links on our page. And so by default, it's going to look like this, right? Which doesn't look great. We definitely need to do something with that. So in my CSS, I am going to focus my unordered list. I'm going to take my color and make my color this light pink, I believe. And actually that won't work. I need to make it all of the links that are children of list items that are children of the unordered list. So that'll be referenced as such. And when we hover over here, like it shows you, that's another great reason why we use VS Code. And if we visit our menu here, we see it working. We are going to take our list items and display them as inline block. And that's put them in a straight line here. I can give my unordered list a width. Give it a width of, say, 60. Viewport width. Margin 0 auto again. Maybe a little bit of... Or actually, we can change that margin top and bottom there to be something like 12 pixels. Right? So now we've kind of spread that out a little bit. We have a menu here that's present. It's centered up, but these things here are not spread out yet. Right? So what I'd want to do is give all of these a width. So width is going to be calc 60 VW divided by 4. That way CSS can do the calculation for me. And that was a little much, probably because of the... Yeah, so we'll say 59 viewport width divided by 4. Text align center. And that'll give us, once we save that, that'll give us a nice centered navigation here. An interesting thing that we could do here is we could play with the text transform property, right? Like by default here, we've camel cased these first letters uppercase, or it's not technically camel case. This would just be capitalized case, right? The first letter's a cap, the rest of it's lowercase. If I wanted to, using CSS, convert this to be all uppercase, I can use text dash transform uppercase, and that will change every letter to an uppercase letter without me having to go through and retype them all. And then I can play with some stuff on hover as well, right? So that would be like UL LI colon hover. Just make them real bold when you hover over them. So now when I hover over them, they get bold. But then you could also do stuff there with background color and things of that nature, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff that could be done. So let's see, what have we done here? And so we've got an HTML skeleton. We have 3 different headings, but they're not at least 2 different levels. So that would be something that we'd want to change. We have 3 paragraphs. We put in 1 picture. So you'd have to figure out another picture to add. Heading text is a different color than paragraph text. A header section with a basic menu. We put our menu in the footer, but there are 4 menu items there. A footer section with a copyright notice. That should be easy enough. CSS in a separate file. Putting your food menu in there with 3 to 5 prices. I think we did enough here to where you could probably figure out the rest. So this is where we'll go ahead and stop for today. I'll provide you with these code files in a GitHub along with the video for the day if you want. So if you want to go back, examine these files a little closer, because I know I kind of move pretty quickly through this sometimes. You know, you can take these, you can download them, you can play with them, you can try to change things, see why they work and why they don't, so on and so forth, right? And so that's where we'll stop for today. If anybody has any questions, we can go ahead and take those now. And I'll hang out in the chat for just a couple minutes here, play some more music, and just kind of hang out in the chat and answer some questions, text-based as well. And if you're watching the recording and you have any questions, please contact me via email, via Teams. Let me know. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.